Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and for today I have something a little different that may seem familiar all at the same time. Stefan talks to me about his time with Straightway. He grew up in a compound with his family, and this story has elements of Synanon, the troubled teen industry, and even the Branch Davidians. A quick bit of business before we start. For anyone who would like to sign up, you can support the podcast through Patreon for as little as £1 a month, with a number of exclusive episodes already available. I also have an Android app you can download from the Google Play Store called The Cult Vault. If you have 5 minutes, please like, share, follow, and review the podcast. I also have a second podcast called The Conspiracy Vault. But enough of business, here is Stefan. So hello, Stefan, and welcome to my podcast. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today.
It's my pleasure.
It's another topic that I haven't come across before, so I am really looking forward to hearing your story. Would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Should I introduce myself in the context of the cult or in just who I am now? I don't know.
It's completely up to you. It's
okay.
Your choice.
We'll save the cult part to the actual conversation. But as for me right now, I live in Austin, Texas, and I am a aspiring filmmaker. I am, in fact, as we were talking, I might get a video log for my feature film, which I'm desperately trying to finish in time to submit to a festival at the end of this week. So the movie's called Remember to Forget, and that's what I've wanted to do pretty much ever since I was a little kid. So
you're actually living the dream.
I had to like do it on my own gumption and elbow grease and find a way, but I did. So
that's incredible. How inspiring is that? Remember to Forget, and this festival, is it like an independent film festival?
It's one of the bigger ones, but with the pandemic, there's so many.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I don't know. I mean, this is for me. It's more of I use this as a goal to get things organized and finished.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what, the festival, there's always a small chance, but I feel pretty good about it. I've been watching the sound mix that my sound guy has been doing that, and it's like I'm discovering it all over again.
That's amazing. Is it really, like, I imagine it's obviously an exhaustive process, but seeing all the little bits come together must be so satisfying and rewarding in terms of applying the really smooth editing cuts and then the sound over the top. That must be amazing. And what process were you at with the project when COVID struck?
We had a locked picture at the end of last year. So basically all the other technical post-production stuff is what we were working on. And then COVID my hopefulness was to be done in like April or something, which was still very, even in the before times, before the fall of man, that was still kind of pie in the sky. Obviously the circumstances or whatever, but at the least I was able to, with this project, to kind of give myself I learned to give myself some grace on time frames and things like that. Cause this has technically been like a 5-ish year process.
Wow.
So, as far as the feature film, like I've been making stuff, I even made stuff during that time frame, but, as far as like,
this is the big one, the big project. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm really excited. When will we know if we can watch it, where we can watch it?
That's to be determined. It'll probably be a little while. I mean, there's a lot of, the world's changing, even before like the whole model of like, hopefully you get into a festival and somebody sees you. I'm sure that'll still be a thing to some extent, but even before that, people were starting to take initiation on their own end. like if you ever hear about there's a movie called Thunder Road that came out a few years ago, and this director guy, this really wild guy named Jim Cummings, he basically released it himself, and it was pretty successful. And he has a new movie coming out that they just released a trailer for called I think it's called The Wolf of Snow Hollow, I think.
Ooh, sounds ominous.
Yeah, so I don't know what that path is, because there's paths like that where it's like,
yeah,
it was a viable path for him, but at the same time, like, it's still a movie that didn't get, it's like not a ton of people have heard of, other than like the people who really saw it and liked it a lot. So it's like, for me, it's like, okay, who do I want to be? Do I want to like aim for this movie to be something that like as many people could see as possible, or do I want it to be more of a stepping stone kind of thing? And I think those are like real moral quandary questions you have to have when like taking your art seriously, and like, you know, because a lot of art, just like cults, there's a lot of delusion and a lot of I don't know, like this conflict between like believing in yourself more than other people in a way, or, you know, believing in yourself in something that literally you only see in your brain, like a prophecy.
Yeah, I definitely can imagine that as a filmmaker, you have a certain vision, and it must be, if you have that vision, it must be very difficult to negotiate on things here and there if you know how you want it to look and sound, and you know, it's not something that can be done exactly how you imagined it. I imagine that must be quite difficult, but there's been a few interesting things that I've seen with the group of people that did they did a crowdfund, but instead of doing things like GoFundMe, they did a buy a credit, and they ended up with 1 million people pay $1 for a credit. So they ended up with £1 million budget from 1 million people donating $1, which I thought was a really cool idea. And then their credits all came up at the end, so I imagine that most of the film was actually credit scene at the end. But that was interesting. And then obviously with the whole COVID thing, you've got Mulan coming straight out onto the Disney Channel, where people can pay to watch it without even going to the cinema. And then people are worried, you know, in the entertainment industry, that if people are happy to sit at home and do that, that's going to unlock a whole new floodgate of, you know, of changes in the industry. So I do wonder how things will change over the next few months, and that's without talking about the live entertainment industry, because that's just heartbreaking right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I actually do improv comedy in Austin, so I have some skin in the game as far as that, but not actual money in the game, which is kind of part of the whole thing. But so as for I personally am not really worried about changes in like the market. Like, I think movie theaters, I don't think they're gonna this is probably the closest it's come to the actual prophecy that people have been saying for decades, that the theaters are dying and movies are dying. But I think people always seem to discount that thing has been said forever, and then there's always some sort of like the 70s where like movies were kind of destroying themselves because they had big budgets and nowhere to go, and then they're like, oh, well, let the little miscreants over here do whatever, and then that was good for like a decade, and then Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are like, Star Wars,
it's just the two of us, nobody else.
So it's an ebb and flow, and I feel like sometimes people think too much of the business side and not the art side, and so I think my goal is, it's like, this is something I want to do my whole life basically, but I've also, like, in this time, I think I've now more than ever attuned with like, what do I want to convey, what do I want to say, what do I want to accomplish through this. And I think in a way that's like, those are the kind of people who think in those terms tend to like think like, what's the opportunity here versus like, oh no, I have no whatever. Because it's like, I mean, I kickstarted, I did a small Kickstarter for this, and then I paid all of the rest of it out of my own pocket, working a retail job, and you know, so.
Wow. So you were really, when you said that, you know, that you'd had to work really hard for this, you were not messing around.
Yeah.
That's pretty commendable though. I mean, it should give people some inspiration who are sitting there thinking about things that they want to do, but not quite finding the motivation to get them done. That's amazing. I mean, it is difficult when you ask yourself ethical questions around your own platform, because I have a Patreon and I love my patrons, and I had to ask myself, do I really want to charge people for any of my content? And I don't, but at the same time, I don't want to stop podcasting. I want to carry on. And it's hard. You get stuck in that cycle of what's the right thing to do. But this is like we're gonna this is like turning into a movie critique podcast. So I'm gonna bring it back to
okay
to our subject. So we're here to talk about a movement called Straightway, which is now known as Restoration City. So just for the listeners, and also for myself, just sum up for us what Restoration City is.
I was kind of doing a little crash course of some of your previous episodes, and I listened to the Synanon one, and I feel like Synanon was very similar, and it probably kind of stemmed from a very similar place. So the best, for me, it's kind of tricky as far as like trying to set the mood, because it's like I'm coming from an experience where I grew up there in the place, which I'll try to explain. So sometimes I'm like, I don't know the facts because I was there. So I experienced it from a place of like believing it and stuff. But the best way I could describe it is there's an organization called Teen Challenge that is still around, I believe. And it's a drug rehabilitation Christian version. I'm
interviewing somebody from Teen Challenge in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, that's good. Because the more I've heard a few things of people saying like, oh yeah, that was pretty much culty in itself. I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I think we're a cult that stemmed from a cult, like
as place. These things do. Yeah.
So I think the time frame was this, like the early to mid 70s. So there's a guy named David Kirschke. So I might at the end of this be like, I don't know if you should say the names or not, whatever. You could really bleep me out or whatever, but I'll let you know how I feel afterwards. But so basically Team Challenge is very much similar to Synanon or the things like that. It was like a rehabilitation place, but also like this one is very Christian based. And the way it was always told, and this might be apocryphal to some extent because this is like their version of it, was basically that Teen Challenge didn't allow whole families to be a part of it. And that's what David wanted to do, is wanted whole families to be able to attend, which now, like, even saying stuff like that, I'm just like, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? Just like,
it does sound like Synanon, though, doesn't it?
I know. And so it became its own thing, and I could not possibly gather which name it started with, but I think it started as Lifeway when it split off, and at first it was in Houston, Texas, and eventually they were able to buy this compound kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it was, from my understanding, it was like a place that used to be a black high school that no longer was being used at all. So they took over that space, and they like imported a church from in town. Like, it's like a church got remodeled, so they took their old church piece by piece and took it to the compound.
I'm glad you said piece by piece, because I was picturing a giant truck with like 50 wheels just taking an entire church down the road.
Yeah. And so, and to give the perfect perspective of this place, which it is literally the middle of nowhere, except it was kind of 10 minutes from a town. So it's like, it's borderline middle of nowhere, I guess.
Right. Okay.
So everything around this place is like farmland. So it's like farmland this way, farmland that way, farmland whatever, and then just this random pocket is the compound, which was made up of the facilities from the high school. So there were classrooms, there was a gymnasium, which the church that they took ended up being attached to. And then in the gymnasium, there was like living quarters above the church part and around the church part.
Right.
I'm not sure if those rooms used to be like meeting rooms in the old church or something, or they added them later. I don't know. But so there's living quarters there. And then near where the classroom is, which is across from the gym, there was a quad, which was what we called it. Everything at this place was very like singular. So there's the quad, there's the gym, there's the chapel. So it's like all, which gives you that feeling of this is it, you know. And so there was the quad, and then there was like some office buildings next to the quad, plus more living areas for people in the rehab program. So pretty much the quad and the other living areas around this office part is where the rehab stuff was happening, and the classrooms as well. And then there was just a lot of just open space. There was a place called the Catfish Pond, which I guess they literally had a pond of catfish at some point, but from most of my memory, it was had no water whatsoever. And then there'd just be random buildings, like a building where they would do like work on cars, I guess, and various things like that. And then, so that's like mostly the rehab stuff, but in the exact same area were bunches and bunches of trailers. And this is where families would live, but not people in the program, people who went through the program and stayed. That's where they would actually have their own, trailers / these are like double wide trailers. Yep. So they look like houses or whatever. Yep. And some people had some really small trailers, but for the most part, it was like actual living places.
Do you remember seeing these trailers?
Yeah.
Was there a lot of them? Did they kind of like just like take up a huge piece of land?
Sort of. I mean, at the most, there's probably like 300 people total. So it was never like a metropolis or something, but and maybe more at some point. I don't know. But so I grew up in a trailer. Most everybody else did, except for the leader, David, who at first he did, and then they built a house, which is its own story within a story within a story. But like, so basically there'd be trailers around the rehab area, and then there was like we called it down the road. There's just more trailers. It's like a quarter of a mile at the most, so it wasn't that far. But then there was more, and then just everything else around was the farmland. If you walked far enough, you'd come to like a silo kind of area. I almost wish I could have interviewed like the farm people a little bit more to get like what they actually felt about the place, because I mean, all I ever heard was like stories of like people being like, "Get off our property," blah blah blah, stuff like that. But like I think in town, the town warden. I think in town there was every once in a while I would hear like a rumble about the place, but very rarely. And I never thought growing up, I never thought of it as like a very culty place. I just thought of it as like us, So yeah. So that's like the place that they moved to, and that's where I grew up. So they would have whole families join the program and live in these dorms and these quads. I mean, there were still people who would be by themselves. Like, I think most people were individuals, but there would be like individual living spaces for the individuals, and I think the quad was mostly for the family version.
Right. Okay.
But these are all people going through the same very religious. As at one point it was called Family Life Training Center, another name of it is. So there was literally like a training center for family life under the Lord.
I just have a million questions right now. Yeah, I have so many questions. So they moved to this church.
Yeah.
And you've just mentioned there that religion played a heavy part. So is there a belief system that Is it predominantly Christian beliefs? Is it a denomination of Christianity that is closely followed? And does it play heavily into the rehabilitation?
Oh yeah, the religion was very big on the rehab part. Like that was kind of the point, is that Jesus is saving you from drugs or
Right.
addiction or whatever.
So was it
I
predominantly drug rehabilitation?
yeah, that's all the way we always took it. I for me it was what my thing growing up was that like these people going through the program were just like me as a child. I would just interact with on a regular basis. So it was like it was hard for me to even define like I never felt unsafe, which I should
Mm-hmm.
have. Like I'm not a person to be like overly judgy, but at the same time, it's just like this is like a firecracker that I'm amazed that like nothing really like uh, super violent happened. But then
Mm.
again, there's probably I know for a fact there's things that have been swept under the rug. And I don't have like a ton of hot goss, unfortunately. I would be open about a lot of things. And I think part of that is actually because my father was, for all intents and purposes, second in command at the place. So David was the leader. That my father was kind of the second figurehead. I don't
Right.
know. I don't know if that was ever like officially defined. It might have been actually like legally and however they said it, but it was definitely like a well known like dad is
Right.
the big authority. If anything,
So
he's kind of yeah.
so there's this church. Religion
Yeah.
plays a big part.
Hmm.
It's mainly drug rehabilitation. There's roughly around about 300 people at a given time residing there, families included.
Yeah.
Um, and there's this guy, David, who runs I'm just going to call it Straightway. I know it's got different
Yeah.
names,
That's
but
the way I
that's
always kind of thought of it.
yeah, that's the one I'm going to stick with. So David Kirchkey, he runs Straightway.
Yeah.
And you said um you kept saying the word they built this and they did that. Are you talking about
Oh yeah.
members of Straightway who would build David a house?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and pay for it, which I think is a big key. So, um, you know, it's. So I was born in 1989, and by that point, I think they'd probably been at that specific spot. I don't know, at least a decade, if not more. And the official start of the Houston part of things was before that. So there's been some establishment, but like
Okay.
David was, I don't know how to explain it, but like he had a father who was kind of like a, a pastor and like kind of a known pastor in his part of the place. I think his name was William, if I'm correct. I could be wrong on that. Excuse me. And it's it's hard to it's hard to like to really define it, because it's like clearly he was like framed as like the complete initiator of this whole thing,
Yeah.
and given like such like a power vibe because of that. And um so but like there was a big change that happened when he had a wife, and he had a, a bunch of kids, and they had the biggest house slash trailer before the house and all that. So, and that never seemed weird because it was always framed as like he deserves it. He's the
Right,
one
right.
who saved all of us. Why not? Go give him all he wants. And he I don't remember, I don't know all the details of the circumstances, but basically his wife left him, and I think it was always framed as like she cheated on him.
Right.
I don't know if that's 100% true or not. I think at least partially it's true, but at least that fact of it. But basically, that whole situation kind of started what felt like a break, and it didn't really like shrink the numbers for a while. but he ended up remarrying a woman who was in the program.
Right.
I think she already got out, but I could be wrong in that fact. But she was 26 years younger than him. And I try not to be judgmental about big age gaps in relationships, but there's always there tends to be a vibe, it's just especially when it's in that range of this feels kind of like, I don't know, this feels like a power grab here. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had another child, which would have been his ninth, I think, some ridiculous amount. And that might include some of the kids he adopted with her. But the kid got super sick when he was born, and it became this entire thing where day and night we are praying for this child. We would go to the chapel and just it was just constant for a month straight or whatever. And the kid ended up living. And it was always framed as the ultimate proof of God's miracle. Mm-hmm. He was always framed as, this is a literal 1 in a million that this happened. And this is proof that God is real and God is here. And so they definitely talked about that all the time as this big thing. I'm look, that means we're right.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because if it would have gone in the other direction, it probably would have been framed that God needed him for something.
Yeah, probably
up there. So,
I have a lot of complicated feelings when it comes to faith healing and stuff, because it's there's another kid who was born to one of the poorer families, and apparently he was super sick, and when he was born, and there weren't no day and night prayer services for this kid. So it definitely had a weird feeling of why didn't we do it for this kid? He was also a 1 in a million baby,
That reminds me of I saw a headline the other day that was the royal baby Charlotte can already speak 2 languages. She's fluent in English and French. And mm-hmm. Some people were so most refugees and asylum seekers can do the same, but nobody's praising them on the front pages of newspapers, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah. But so David, he wants to start a drug rehabilitation program like Teen Challenge, but he wants it to be inclusive of families. So he purchases this land.
Yeah, somehow. I don't know how that happened, but yeah.
He purchases this land, moves everyone onto it, moves a church there. Everybody's living there. And does he run the rehabilitation program himself?
So there was a power structure of some sort. There were people who worked there, but pretty much everyone who worked there, other than a few rare cases, were people who also went through it.
So they weren't necessarily qualified.
Parents, both my parents went through it. That's how they met. That's how I exist. Is they went through this program, mm-hmm. And then they would stay a part of the program, and much like the Synanon episode, a big thing that happens is eventually there's a sense of you can't ever leave, because then you'll start sinning again. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think addiction and stuff was always framed as a sin issue. So that was a very big and it was framed as a sin to leave, or if you are leaving, it's a very it was a big deal. Are you can't do this or whatever. So, and also people would get kicked out of the rehab a lot too. So I would just have these weird acquaintances who I'd be friendly with and be hey, how's it going? And then just suddenly they're gone. It's just right. Oh yeah, they left or they got kicked out or something like that. And, there has to be a reason for that. And I was never made privy to any of those situations. Because I was young or whatever. But basically, there was a group of people running this program who, I don't know what it takes to be qualified. I'm going to make the strong assumption that they weren't. That it was not, if there is a qualification, it was the qualification set up by the place itself. But the big thing about that is like, it was pretty much all men. It was very much a men are the leaders, women are the sub, So, not to say that there was women without any somewhat authority, but there was definitely no. I don't think there was any official like women leadership. If anything, it was more like there was women leadership over women, and then there's male leadership over men. So that was very structured like that.
Okay.
So, and I think like there were women who did like teachings and things of that sort. Like I wish I could give you a better more specifics.
I'm getting a picture of it here.
Yeah.
So your parents, they go through the program. Is there like a graduation ceremony or something to mark the end of your official time in the program?
Yeah. So actually, I think there was at least 2, if not 3, ceremonies each year. And I might be mixing up a couple of ceremony things. So, for example, I think in the summer there was like a kind of a more scaled down. We'd meet in the gymnasium, and there'd be a graduation, and it'd be kind of like a potluck kind of thing. Now, at the place, there was a kitchen area, and hopefully I'll be able to give you more specifics about just weird things like this that I don't forget. Like, for example, like there was a kitchen area, and that was one of the tasks of the people there, is they would cook dinner for themselves, but also they would take food to the families around the place. So they would like make dinner for us, and I guess food was either donated or part of like the thing or whatever. So there was a frequent, like, I feel like for some reason chicken and dumplings was the one all the time, and things like that. I remember like the only one I ever liked was beef tips and rice, and that was never enough of that one. I always liked that one. But like there'd be people come over who they'd make them go house to house. Here's your dinner, and have these plates or whatever. And like, so they take them to the trailers. And one thing I want to say, just so I don't forget it, because I think this is a big point or a big thing that I just took for granted. But each house, at least, I mean, it felt like every house, had an intercom system. And so what you could do is, and this was just totally normal to me, every house was connected to the intercom system, and you could you didn't press a button to call, you press a button to instantly connect. So you press a button and be like, Joe, something like that. Yeah. So literally you could press a button and just listen.
No. What with like 300 people?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there was probably like a set. This is mostly the families, I think, who were in trailers.
That's so strange. Yeah. So everybody's just listening to each other.
They could be, yeah. Like I never would have assumed that when I was there. That
and this is like in the 90s as well.
Like
before, like Big Brother and all the.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Weird.
So that was just the normal thing. It's just like, because there was things like that I used to kind of take pride in, being like, I also always took pride in the fact that we never had to lock our door, because it's like we're so safe and perfect that we never have to lock our door. And I remember like when we left and we had to move into town, and I'm like, I have to lock my door. This is the end of the whatever, like, technically you probably should have been locking our door, because there are probably more bad things happening than I realized. But yeah, that's just one tangential thing. But let me get back to the ceremony thing. So I think it was in the summer or around that time, there'd be like one version of the graduation. And I think it was kind of like weirdly like college, where there was like an associate and then a bachelor's and then whatever. So I think there was like tiers of graduation. So you would get to one level and be like, you got this far. And then there was an official graduation. So they'd be like,
sounds a little bit like the 12-step program, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think of the 12-step program a lot, and I feel like there's always something weirdly about the systems where like I like a lot of 12-step stuff. And then there's always just someone who's like, but you know what would make this really great is if we all lived in a compound
If we all
together
lived
and I'm the
together.
leader. Yeah. We're just like, no, that's not the point. You're supposed to have a higher power, which means you are not the higher power, you son of a bitch. But anyway, can I cuss on this? I can.
Yeah, it's your story. You tell your story however you wish. So just going back to this intercom thing, because that's just like,
yeah.
I'm
Let me finish the graduation thing.
Yeah,
quick.
Sorry.
Yeah, I made the tangent, but we'll come back to that. Because there's an important part. It's like the first one is kind of like a normal summer thing. And I think we had a few things like that, but there's two in the winter time, or fall technically, I guess. But there'd be Thanksgiving, and everybody ate Thanksgiving together, unless they randomly went out of town, which they shouldn't. They shouldn't. So we would all eat Thanksgiving together in the gymnasium, and then we would have a talent show. And so people would just do random stuff at, like, after we had eaten Thanksgiving. We'd all clean up, and then we'd all have a talent show. And
that's strange,
so,
isn't it?
I know. And like the thing that is, like, there was this thing called turkey trials where they would just randomly roast people for like making mistakes. And like I wish I could remember specifics. I can't. But in retrospect, I'm like, they probably were just like airing like people's actual dirty laundry out.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it sounds like when people just shun each other in these cult environments that we hear about so much.
Yeah, and then I when I was young, I'll tell you this embarrassing story because it kind of gives a mindset of my little youth thinking about this cult. And I'll bring up another thing that's going to be another tangent that we'll definitely talk about if we have the time. But I think Scott told you about the thing that went to schools, the group that, like, they take people, kids basically, and send them to schools. It's like a drug. It's like, say no to drugs, that kind of thing. But so they would like perform at these things too. Like they would make them just like do their show. That they would go to schools and just like make them do it. And so it was this weird version of like narcissism, I guess, about like, look how great we are. We would watch them on these things. But I remember when I was a kid, in my mind, like they would do like these choreographed dances and things like that. And so in my mind, this is what greatness was. So I was like, I'm going to do a dance at the talent show. And I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And I was like, I'm going to do a dance. And, my director of photography just sent the video file. That's good. I was like, they do these dances, and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. Obviously, I mean, everyone's clapping, so it must be great. So I'm like, I have to like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this, but I have to have a shtick. For some reason in my mind, I felt like I had to have a shtick for this dance. So I was wearing, like, this was all the day of the talent show. Like, I'm thinking all this up. So I'm I'm like thinking like, okay, I have this t-shirt of a white tiger on. I'm like, okay, this is my shtick. And my shtick was, I'm the man of tigers. And I'm like, but it had to be a Christian thing. So I'm like, I'm the man of tigers of the Lord. So my dance shtick was going to be, I'm a guy who has Christian tigers, I guess.
And you're like 5.
Yeah. This is all perfectly sensical in my mind. And so I sign up and I get on stage, and I'd like even like made a little outfit. I took foam cups and I put them on my arm. Like I had like little, like ready to jive. Like I'm all ready up. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do dance. But the thing is that I just thought dancing happened. So I get up on stage and I'm just waiting for music to start, because I just thought that's what it was. It was just like this magical God experience, I guess, which I guess some people with dancing would probably say that's the case. But so I remember just sitting and being like, where's the music?
Oh.
And then my dad took me off stage, you know.
Oh, no.
So
that's so funny.
So I was committed to this. I was like, yes, we are great. This is awesome. So that was the Thanksgiving thing. And then lastly, there was a really like big ceremony that they would go to like a banquet hall in a hotel. It was always called The Banquet, again with the banquet, because even the place, we called it The Center. That's all everyone called it. Like we thought we were the center of the universe, I guess. So, but this banquet, like, yeah, then everyone would get dressed fancy. And I guess it was kind of like a fundraiser. Like, I guess they would somehow get people outside of the thing to like pay money to come to this banquet.
Okay.
So there had to be a some part of the revenue stream was stuff like that. So yeah. And then, but when I was a kid, again, a really weird, in retrospect, thing was they have kids, and this was like an exciting thing for kids, but like, they would have kids do a choir bit at this thing, but basically, like, they weren't allowed to be at the actual banquet. They would like usher them in to do their song, and then they would force them to leave, and they would like take them back to the compound, and like they'd like watch them at night while their parents were at the banquet or whatever. And for me, that was actually kind of an exciting time, because it was just like you felt like the spirit of everything a little bit, but also the banquet was taken as like this big adult magic thing, that was always like this big signifier, and that was like the big graduation ceremony,
right?
Like,
yeah
it wouldn't change like where you were in the process, but like that was the one, that was the big one.
Potential sponsors or people with money might come and go, wow, look at all these amazing people that have gone through this program of cooking people's meals and listening to them in their homes.
I think
cool.
Hopefully it was a dog and pony show of some sort.
So do you know on average how long the programs lasted for, or was it different for every person?
I honestly am not sure. I think a year was technically it.
Yeah, and it might have been parents short. Would you class them as rehabilitated after they'd spent time in Straightway?
I mean, that's a very tricky question, but I mean, the short answer is yes. But I think the caveat is they are also people who drank the Kool-Aid, for lack of a better word. So They were rehabilitated and they stayed. And so they're very much like, I think there was like, they believed the evilness that they are overcoming and the evilness they had to avoid. So, and this is not even like a real big judgment on them. I think anybody probably could have fallen into this, especially people coming out of an addiction.
Very vulnerable. Yeah.
They believed what they were told, like not only that there was rehabilitation, but to stay this way, because I personally believe, and I have a couple siblings who are dealing with addiction issues and stuff like that. So to this day, so I still see it firsthand. It's just like getting sober is better than not being sober.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have somebody who tells you, I'm sure there was probably, a number of times where your parents did attempt to get sober, because I feel like Straightway is almost like a last stop, last resort kind of, if you're willing to move your whole life and settle somewhere.
And I think part of it too is like, I don't know if it was always this way, but like I think you probably have done more research than I've done on this kind of stuff, but like I think there's ways that the legal system contributes to places like this, to where it was kind of emphasized. In fact, that was a big thing for a while, where they were like, George Bush in the State of the Union was talking about faith-based, rehab places, and we were like, that's us. He's talking about us. So it was, and that always felt like, oh, we've reached something. Spoiler alert, very right wing, if there was any politics, so not a surprise there, I think. I personally have not, I have my own journey, which maybe if we keep talking, we'll just kind of get to the point where we left and all that. But
I think so. So your parents are in this program, they meet, they have you. Are you the oldest of your siblings? And how many of you are there?
I'm second oldest, so I have an older brother, and then
Okay.
3 younger siblings, 2
Okay.
sisters, and a youngest brother. And my dad, I think, was 23 when he got married, and my mom was 30. So
Okay.
so they kind of, it was interesting. It was like just 2 worlds colliding kind of thing, which was always kind of a cool, even in retrospect, is kind of like it kind of gives you like a thought about like how life just is, like, you know, like that's the thing I miss. And I think anything I miss from that time is very much in a cloud of I'm missing them within the ignorance I was in it. But at the same time, like, you know, for all the people who come and go, you still meet just a lot of interesting folks. And you know, like, I think now the stereotype is that, you know, evangelicals are super political. I feel like most of that must have really got full force kind of near the tail end of my time there, because in my mind, I think politics, and maybe because it was like Bill Clinton was in power or whatever, it's like politics was taken as like a very worldly thing. So the idea of like giving so much emphasis on politics seems so antithetical to like what we were, like that wasn't the point, you know. And I like that, you know, like, yeah, I think they did a kind of a wrong way of approaching that, but in the sense of like, no, if you get political, or if you believe Democrats or whatever, then you're believing something evil, you know. So but because of that, there would be a lot of avoidance, because it's like you're avoiding the devil. So yeah, so I don't even know where I got on that tangent. I apologize.
No, honestly, this is fascinating for me. I'm just listening to you kind of just, you know, your stream of consciousness as you remember things.
Yeah.
So your parents, they go through this program, they graduate, they stay, they go on to teach. What about the children? Are you then, is the school used as an actual school, and that's what the kids do in the daytime?
Yeah, my memory is fuzzy on this a little bit. And I think part of it because it was probably the education was poor. So I didn't have the educational wherewithal to be able to remember. Like, I went to a private school, a very small one, not like a prestigious private school, but an Episcopal school, more appropriately, in 5th grade. But before that, they definitely was very much an emphasis on on-site education.
Right.
And I don't know if this for a fact, but my theory is that the ideal world was like they would have loved for it to be like a nobody ever leaves for education thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But you know, middle of nowhere means, you know, very, you know, poor people. So I think we weren't, the goals weren't rich enough to be able to like to get that way. So my guess is that people just got so fed up with like having to care for their kids all the time. They were like, they had like they did like mental loop-de-loops of like, oh, actually it's not bad, you know, they'll believe it, and in fact we'll send them into schools and they'll teach other kids or something, you know. That's probably my guess is like, you know, the reality was they were just fed up with having to homeschool kids, and like and I bet the place didn't give as much emphasis on that as they did like the cash cow of people coming to the program, which cost money. So so through 4th grade I homeschooled, and I have very little memory. I do remember at least before 1st grade, maybe through 1st grade, there was classrooms on site. Like they were actually teaching kids at the place. And so that was happening to some extent. Now,
right. Okay.
So I don't have the knowledge of why that stopped. I just have the guess is that it was like not. It was probably David being like, "This costs money," you know, and it's not bringing money back, you know, like so. Yeah, I think I don't know. It's like after a while, pretty much everyone went to school one way or another. and I went to this Episcopal school called St. Thomas, which I really loved, honestly. It's very small. But, I read my first book in 5th grade. My first novel. I probably read
Do you
fiction.
remember what it was?
It was Harry Potter. Which made me feel like I was on an adventure even more so, because I was going to school the first time, like the cafeteria. Like, so I was imagining like Hogwarts as this Episcopal school and like all that. So it added to the vibe quite a bit. And I did that through 5th through 7th grade. And then it closed down, which is its own weird story, like about a guy who like gave all these scholarships away and and like then just left. Like he was so I think he basically led to the place getting closed down.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know. I was like, that would have been its own podcast story, probably. But
oh my goodness, yeah.
But then after that, I went to public school.
And what age were you when you started attending public school? And was that a strange transition for you?
It was more because I was everything I've been told about public school was like evil,
worldly.
Yeah. And that actually, now that I say that, I have a memory that just popped in my head of my dad like using public school as like a threat. Like, if you can't,
I'll send you there. You'll
Exactly.
go.
Exactly. I think this is while I was at St. Thomas. It's like, do you want to go to public school where you'll get like destroyed and beaten up with a piece of shit? No, you didn't say that, obviously. I just like no, I will do it. And then when I got to public school, and it was a billion times easier, and like St. Thomas actually did a good job of like preparing me for actually like school. Like public school is the easiest time of my education, so it was like this weird moment of like, this is nothing like this evil Satan layer that I was told of. Although it did give me like this judgment over people, which was for a while, I think. I was I never, my brother always harassed me of being judgmental. I think what I was actually like speaking the morals.
Yeah, it's this is what you've been told though your entire life. This is what you've been taught, that you're, the chosen group. You've been saved and you're living righteously, and because so of course you're going to think that.
Yeah, my distinct memory is like just assuming that people in public school like weren't Christian, which is like, I lived in East Texas. I mean, it's like, what else is there? Like, there's Catholics, there's whatever. But I mean, Catholicism, like, as I'm sure you're aware, is like, for evangelicals or people of this sort, for some reason, is always like this boogeyman. Like, it's treated as like, it's worse than not a Christian for some reason. So that tends to be this weird judgment. But so I remember distinctly having a crush on a girl, my very first crush, and I was way more bold back then. Like, why did this boldness not stay with me? I don't know why. But, I honestly am just like, think about things. I'm like, Stefan, get this back. You used to be like brave.
Yeah.
But I remember going up to her. Yeah.
With foam cups.
Exactly. And then I went up to this girl and I just went, I'm a Christian.
Like, that's the best pickup line.
Yes. I've never done anything like that since, and like maybe I should. I don't know. I technically am more agnostic now. I don't know. I'm kind of like in this realm where it's like I don't want to define it necessarily, but it's like, I think a lot of people who leave kind of come in this quandary of like, I think it's hard to reconcile like the good things that they experienced with the obvious bad, it's easy to have a target like David in the organization, but Christianity itself is never really blamed. I think most of the people I talk with, and like there's certain internet groups of people who left, most of them are still Christian. There's a few who aren't, but I think most of them are. And
is it interesting to speak to people who were active participants in the rehabilitation side of it and didn't grow up kind of with parents who were in the program?
I don't know. I've been trying to. I've actually tried to be more active. Like, I'm in this group. I made an email address and stuff. I was like, hey, I want to hear your stories. Like, I'm a filmmaker, but I've never actually made a attempt to like do a story about it. It's such a big story. It's such a personal story that like I almost would rather want to do it as like an allegory or something. If I was going to make a movie, like my first feature film is about two hipsters who meet at a bar and have like a kind of a dream meet cute, very Charlie Kaufman kind of movie. So it's not really cult. I think it relates to me in that situation and more like repression of trauma and not thinking of it as trauma. And that's what I've had to come to understand from that. So I think for me, since I grew up and my dad was kind of like number two for all intents and purposes, I feel like I come from this weird perspective of, you know, almost feeling like I got like the best version, like I got preferential treatment.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Which I did, honestly, you know, like, like for one, I mean, believe it or not, most people are sane to children. So I think that growing up there gives you like, at least like some benefit of the doubt, you know?
Yeah.
But I was also very, I don't want to say gullible, but definitely I believed in the good. And so you hear rumors of a bad thing. And I think this is how like these things kind of keep going, is like either the rumor's not believed, like, no, that couldn't be, because David is the leader of this group that's obviously great, so therefore he has to be good.
Yeah. Or George Washington endorses these types of programs, so how can it be bad?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's that, but there's also things would change when he would be figured out for doing something.
Right.
And so the rule would change. Be like, oh, actually, this is good. And one thing that changed big, and this is a big part of the story, is that people started drinking. So there's all these ex-addicts, and it was a dry place. It was like a very like separated place. And then slowly the separation and then things like that stopped. And basically, from everything I can gather, it's all basically like David being a hypocrite,
right?
And then getting caught, and then all of a sudden it's not a bad thing anymore. It's like, oh God.
Oh, you hear that sometimes with the movements that that change from monogamy to polygamy. If somebody higher up is found to be unfaithful, and then all of a sudden men can have more than one wife.
Yeah.
It's a bit strange like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You also mentioned that there would be different buildings or workshops where people would work on cars and things like that. Are these the cars of people that live in the compound, or is this a way for people to generate money? Are they fixing other people's cars to kind of build funds up? Because that's very Cinnamon.
Yeah. I actually am not sure. It felt like it was only for us, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of, money involved. It would not surprise me at all. I mean, I'm sure that there was some sort of way of revenue generation from that. But as far as my memory is, it was kind of like a self-sufficient kind of thing.
And do they pay to live on the compound, or do they build houses for David and stuff and offer free labor as a way to kind of stay there?
I do remember somebody who left, like they tried to do some sort of legal shenanigans with the house that they lived there. So I think, I don't think they were charged like a property tax or something, but I think that was a way of control too. I could be completely wrong on the syntax or whatever, but that's the way it seemed like to me, where it's like people were not getting charged these things, but that was another reason you couldn't leave. That's another reason leaving would just be like this ungratefulness, this and people would not, there weren't many jobs. I mean, I'm sure people had some jobs. Like my dad was a pool salesman and still is. So people would get jobs outside of the place, go into Houston or Sugar Land, which is a city between Houston and where I grew up, or Rosenberg, or the small town. So people were probably living on pretty low wage jobs, but then having being able to survive because of the whatever. So they couldn't leave, or if they left, it was like a big deal. Like, okay, now I'm in the real world with property tax, with all kinds of things like that, you know. So
nobody's bringing me dinner. Nobody's
exactly.
nobody's speaking to me on the intercom. What's going on?
Exactly.
But I mean, for people who are, you know, you mentioned going to public school, and people are still having to go off site to have jobs. So there is still that almost interaction with worldly people and things and experiences, which stops the community itself from becoming entirely insular, which I suppose was probably a good thing in the grand scheme of things, because you've mentioned how you are surprised that something more sinister didn't happen, and I'm just thinking about the latest Patreon coverage that I've done is like a 3-part series on the Branch Davidians, who are also based on a commune in Texas. I'm not sure which part of Waco, Texas is it northeast, southwest?
It's a little more central. So I live in Austin, so I'm about like an hour and a half away.
Okay. And this happens 4 years after you're born, the siege in Waco.
Yeah.
And that's completely insular. As far as I'm aware, people were not leaving that compound at all. And obviously horrible, awful things did happen on that compound. So when you describe the compound that you grew up in, I keep going back to the pictures that I've seen and the footage that I've watched, even though I know they're two completely different things. But do you think that there was a certain tone, or do you ever remember anybody speaking about that? Maybe that's why the farmers thought that the compound was a bit strange.
I think, yeah, because like there was no fence or anything like that. It was like, when I said compound is just the best way to sum it up, you know.
Yeah.
But when people think compound, they think, you know,
chain link fence. Yeah,
exactly.
Do not trespass.
Exactly. So I think that probably contributed to the fact, like, 'cause I never thought of us as a cult or anything resembling one.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you know, growing up, I think we would like, you know, view like the Branch Davidians as like as that's a cult, you know, or they think of them as weird, or other religions as weird or whatever. Like, it was always kind of like a, you know, framed under like a sanity.
I think didn't see the similarities when you were growing up.
No, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, I thought of it as like the fact that we didn't have a fence, you know, we didn't have that kind of blockage, kind of like maybe like almost like maybe internally, if I even had a consideration of it, would just be like, we don't have a fence. You know? Like, but at the same time, it's like the fence was the middle of nowhere, you know, so you don't really need a fence in that case. And like, technically there was a functioning city that was not, that like the farmers lived, and then like some families lived, and like so I think the population now of that whole city is like 400, and there's barely anybody at the Restoration City. So there's still people, but we never interacted with them at all. You know, it was like it felt like we were our own place completely. So there was definitely a mental fence to some extent. But like, we had, like, growing up, it felt very, you know, strict, but then like the strict stuff just kind of slowly moved away a little bit at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's, you know, like familiarity and comfortability, and after a while
exactly. And I'm very thankful for that, because, you know, at least I had like I felt connected to the world to some extent. Like, we got a satellite dish at like the end of the 90s, so it was like eventually like we had the access that a lot of other people did. But you know, also I think there's like a pride of small townness a little bit. Like, we felt it. Yeah, it's so hard to explain. It's like since there was no actual fence, it felt like we were in control of the separation. Like we were a part of it. It was like our function. So it didn't make it, it made us feel like superior, I think. Like even going into college, I went to college in 2008. And that was a year after my dad went to prison, which we'll definitely talk about. Spoiler alert. Even going to college, like I joined these Christian groups. Like I went to college at the University of Texas, you know, which is like the liberal city in Austin, the liberal city in Texas. But I was a part of Christian groups, and I would see them and I'd be like, maybe someday they'll be as good as us, you know. I was still believing even up through then.
You probably will have those thoughts though, you know, every now and then, little snippets. Do you think that it's difficult to escape religion in a place like Texas?
I think so, because I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if escape is hard. I think
avoid. I don't know. It's because to me, living over here in England, I sang hymns in my primary school. So like, you know, young school. After kindergarten, you go up to primary school, and that's as much as that's the exposure that I had. I never went to church on Sundays. I've never been to a church service. I've been to one wedding in a church, which was strange for me. When my friends are like, oh, I want to go and light a candle in this church for somebody that passed away, I never go in the church and do that, because I don't understand what it means to do that. And I kind of feel a bit uncomfortable going in and watching my friends do that when I don't understand. I don't know. I just feel really out of place. And to me, when I talk to people that come from heavy religious places, to me, Texas and that part of America is just defined by religion. I think that's how it's seen to some of us over here in England, but obviously you live there, so I'm just interested to know what you think.
I don't know. I think there's all these pickets of people who think that they believe the right thing.
Right.
And so it's hard. I feel like for a lot of people, like especially like, you know, white Texans, there's probably not a lot of people who want to separate, you know, because they probably feel like they are the ones, the
right.
They're on the right path. And so I don't know. We're at the election and everything. We're so in the middle of all this mumble jumbo of like ideologies clashing with each other that it's almost hard to see because I used to believe full-heartedly in like the right-wing version of things, and then I had a huge shift the other way, which still feels weird because I was like the goody two-shoe. Like I always go sit in front of the church. You know, I would sit in front of the church. I would listen to the sermons. You know. And I felt like I was like, I always wanted to make movies, which the reason I was able to make movies or had the desire is because of this video game called Steven Spielberg's Director's Chair, which is like this little interactive game that's really great. And I would play that on this computer in the middle of nowhere you know, on a little in the middle of nowhere, you know? So I, you know, if that hadn't happened, who knows?
Yeah.
You know? That was like probably the little instigator thing that like snuck in that like led to me having some sort of ability to move on. I mean, also there was a lot of drama and stuff like that. But
and did you have any friends that or kids of a similar age that were there with you for like a long period of time? I know that we were supposed to have a second person with us this evening who wasn't able to make the interview. And it would have definitely been interesting to get that perspective, to see how similar or different you remember things.
Yeah.
But did you have people, or kids that maybe you're like still in touch with?
Not a lot. Really, when I went to college, like, when I was always a teeny bit of a loner, not like always by myself. Like, I felt like I was with friends and stuff like that to some extent, but like I've always been a little something about it. I don't know what it is, but I've always been a little separate. Um, um, and then when I went to college, it was like I found people who actually like the movies I liked and
Same
things like
things,
that,
yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of people I grew up with, I mean, especially since we left the place, technically, we left the cult, technically, that did cause a cut. I feel more connection to the town of Wharton, where I went to high school, than I do the place I really grew up in, because of that. So, but I went to a 10-year anniversary of high school a couple of years ago there, and I went one time since, and that's it. I don't really have much of a connection anymore. And like I don't want to phrase this easier, but like it wasn't much of a choice. It really wasn't. Like, I mean, I feel good about being on my own to some extent, but I think in my heart I always thought like this would be a part of my life forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is, and even after like people started to leave and the place was shut down, and I always thought it would be I would be a good guy. I would stick the fight out. And the fact that I didn't for various reasons. Yeah.
And you mentioned briefly before a story about the house that was built for David.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you wanted to go down that tangent.
Yeah. I think that's a good example of like, so there's a certain point where offerings and tithing, giving money was just constantly a thing. And it was always framed as God will reward you. And the more you give, the more you'll be rewarded. And there was this thing called first fruits that they would say that, like, which is a semi-common thing, but it's basically the idea of like giving a big offering, so that as your first whatever. And so giving was just constantly brought up over and over again. So people, and that's probably part of the reason why the idea of people going out and getting regular jobs and stuff like that was not as frowned upon, is because it's like they're giving offerings, so you have to get the money to do that. And I feel like there's also a couple of token like people who went through the program and have to be like from rich families, so like they would kind of milked in that. But all that to say, the house was built from that kind of system,
Okay.
So it was definitely like it was paid for by the people in the church. And like they even did weird stuff where like they had the wood outline of the house in the gymnasium for some reason. I've never understood that. I don't know if it was like some weird show and tell thing, or
what, like the blueprints almost of the house.
Yeah, but it was like the woods, so it was a whole house made out of the wood framing in the gym.
That's strange.
Yeah. I never. All I could think of is that was some weird like show off thing. Like, look at this house, And then he built it, and that was like the only real house in this whole place for a while.
And did the residents build it, or did you get professionals to come in and build the house?
I'm not sure. I think it might have been more professional, but I could be wrong. Honestly, it could have been them. The last time I drove by, it's still there, and there's a second house now, which from my understanding, is one of the people who, as I said, like had rich connections.
Yeah.
They finally made them build a house there or something. But that's the only houses there. Everything else is trailers and the dorms and things like that.
And you mentioned people bringing you cooked meals, and that was one part of the program that they were enrolled in. I know that you didn't obviously you didn't take part in the rehabilitation side of things because you were a child growing up, but do you know of anything else that would have been included in the therapy?
Work, like they make them mow and do all kinds of like that shop. I guess they'd make them work in the shop. You're like, basically it's like labor,
Right.
And it was all framed as part of the sobriety. And then there was also classes, which I almost never knew anything that was taught in those classes.
Right.
In retrospect, I wish I'd gotten a view for my current self. To better understand. I know we had these like old ass videos that they played all the time that I guess they just had like a set thing that they rarely changed. That was all about, religious based. This is how you're going to get better, you sinner,
Yeah, I'm thinking of like Fallout when they're like play the videos of going to the shelter.
Exactly. Yeah.
So have you been back to the compound since you left, just for curiosity?
Yeah, a couple times. I never got out of the car, but it was definitely like a Vietnam syndrome kind of thing. It's like,
Do you think it seems a lot smaller than it was when you were small?
Not smaller, but lesser. Like so many people have left. And like there's a lot less families. Like the last time I went by, it seemed like I guess they're like reorganized to like less family based and more like individuals, because where there used to be trailers, there's now what appear to be like individual, like more dorms. So I have to guess that's what's going on, where it's like there still are people who live there who have lived there, but it's a lot fewer, and it's just more of a rehab side of it now, I guess. That's all I can figure. I don't know from actual fact. I was too chicken to get out of the car. So,
why do you think that? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I just didn't want to ruffle feathers or anything. I'm not very much an anarchist like a lot of my leftist friends are. I wish I could be, but I'm more of like the world's too big to just burn down. Okay. And for me, it's always been like I'll forget about it for a long time, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, this was me.
Yeah.
It's such a weird experience.
Your parents are stayed. They've got all of the children growing up, and you're born in 89, and then it gets to 2005, I believe, is the year that your father is involved in a vehicle collision.
Yeah, that's correct. It was it was technically the 30th, so not New Year's Eve, but it was technically the 31st because it happened like super in the morning. So basically my dad went to a work party and got super drunk, and then still decided to drive home because he was going to go to work the next day. And then he blacked out and swerved into the other side of the road and hit a car head on and killed somebody in the other car. And I remember that day pretty vividly because, by that point, like the summer before, this was kind of a comical story, but not with the whole context. But there was this condo in Galveston that the place owned, that they would like let people use for vacations and stuff. Galveston is an island in Houston area. Right. I remember I was getting really sensitive to the drinking because of growing up, it was seen as a sin.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I just had this like weird, like, why is they allowing this to happen? I don't get it. And then like my dad would like come home drunk a lot. And he would like do weird stuff or whatever. And a couple times he'd be blacked out with my mom or whatever. And I always just had a bad vibe. And I remember one time we were in Galveston, and I just like was searching for the booze, and I found it. And I was like, I don't know, 15, not quite 16 yet, but I was like, I'm just going to drink a lot of this stuff,
I thought you were going to say you poured it away. You're like, no, I'm just going to drink
poured it into myself. And it was the first time I've ever done anything like that. I was never I never drank in high school other than this, technically. So, I never was a party person or whatever. I was very much like, I believed, that I would be rewarded for my faithfulness or whatever. Mm-hmm. Which, spoiler alert, no, I wasn't. But I did this, and I was like, and I felt so guilty that I went to, instead of just going back home, I went to like turn myself into like the security. And I was like, I'm 15 years old and I'm drunk. And so they ended up taking me back to the apartment. And then my dad I kind of told him, I was like, I didn't want you to drink anymore, I think is what I said, something like that. Mm-hmm. I was like, and then he randomly promised me that he wouldn't again, this was like 6 months before the accident or mm-hmm. something.
But he probably genuinely meant that at the time, didn't he? After seeing what his actions had driven his child to do, that I imagine maybe in that moment, his paternal instinct, he was truthful. But of course, if you're somebody who has an addictive personality and has suffered with addiction throughout your life, and then gradually alcohol is being sort of allowed and maybe at times encouraged, and then he's living in a place where he's graduated from the program. Mm-hmm. So unless he went back to the very start again and went through the program to become sober from alcohol, how was he ever going to get sober?
I mean, I think that wasn't the point at that point. I think they didn't frame the alcohol as addiction.
Right.
So So it basically was just kind of like, this is how things are, it's okay to do this, but it clearly was a something that it was a problem for him. So, so I don't know, like it had to happen. And then, that, I don't know if that was like the beginning of the end. Like, I feel like things are already kind of like sort of drifting, but that was definitely like, a big moment, because that accident happened, and I remember the night it happened, like I got a call from my mom. It's like, go find your dad, he's probably like passed out in the truck in the driveway or whatever. And I remember going outside and there was nothing there, and just having such a dreadful feeling, like, what? And then me and my brother like went kind of searching for him. Like the party was in this place in a different city, close by, and we ended up going to the place where the party was, and I don't know how they found out, but like he would have already been taken to the hospital by that point. That was just like a crazy time. And then we go to the hospital, and he's like all passed out, and but the thing that was really interesting, or in retrospect, as far as related to the whole place, is that nobody was told the full story. Except for like a couple of people in leadership who knew about it, and us. And so we kind of had to keep it secret, which I don't know why they felt like they had to keep it secret, other than like keeping up appearances, I guess. And so they didn't tell any people that, like, my dad got his plea deal. I guess it was technically a plea deal.
Right.
For a 12-year sentence. In August of 2007, just after I came back from a camp, he told me that. And my impression the whole time was like, I heard stuff of like the minimum sentence would be like 6 months or something. So I was like, well, my dad's a good guy, so he'll definitely get the minimum sentence, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I had this thought the whole time. I was just like, it's not going to be a big deal. He'll have to do it. And then like, 12 years. That's the sentence. Like, whoa. Um, and so that whole month of August 2007 was just a trip because it was just before my senior year of high school. I get the news that he's going away for a lot longer than I thought. Like my whole feeling of everything was just turned upside down. And then the day before the sentencing, which is a few days after my birthday, I think. My birthday was August 20th, so it was a few days after my birthday. The day before the sentencing, we had kind of like this last meal because he was going to go to prison basically the next day. Mm-hmm. And then while we were there was these cops who were eating next to us. And my grandmother was living with us at the time. She was
your maternal or paternal? Your mother's, okay.
Yeah. And she was living with us at the time. Or actually, she might have just moved into town, but she was like close by. But she was supposed to come join us. And I remember somehow we were just said out loud, I wonder where grandma is. I haven't heard from her, or whatever. And the cops heard us, took my parents outside, and my grandma had just been in a fatal accident. She died. And they were the cops at the scene.
And they just, whoa, oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so I remember him coming back in, and we were saying we got to go home. And halfway through the drive, I somehow just knew it was grandma because she was older. She was in her mid-80s or almost mid-80s.
Oh my goodness!
And she was kind of stubborn. She would like drive her stuff around and stuff. But it was devastating. So, like the day before the sentencing, this happens. And then the day of the sentencing, like we're just going through just shock, like all this, and then we had to go to the courthouse the next day. A guy who was part of the leadership who had married the daughter of the pastor, one of the pastor's daughters actually, and then left, and like that's a story. I don't know all the details, but like he came in and sat on the other side. He sat there was all the people from the compound who were supporting my dad. He went and sat on the other side of the family that got affected. And like, it was just this weird moment. And then it turns out he had like sold our story to a local news network, Fox 26, which is the Fox station in Houston. And they did like an investigative report on my father.
Whoa!
and the whole
goodness.
place. And I've been looking for this video. Like I guess they just didn't save it in any place to watch it. But I remember it'd be like, they didn't say compound. It was like, this rehab program says they have an 89% success rate. But then why is one of their leaders going to prison? Like it was like, I was like, holy shit. And then there's my dad. And it was really crazy in a lot of ways because like that didn't happen until like a few months after he went to prison. But basically, so grandma dies. Next day, my dad's sentenced to prison. The judge gave us the weekend so he can attend the funeral, which I'm very thankful for. I'm like, so yeah, judges can do stuff like that, with all the stupid stuff that happens in the legal system, they could just do that,
Yeah.
So, and we actually went to Galveston again that weekend. I have no memory at all of that time. I'm
not surprised. Even one of those events for somebody that age must be like impossible to comprehend, let alone all of it happening at the same time.
Yeah. And then Monday was the start of school.
Oh my goodness.
Tuesday was my grandmother's funeral. And then Wednesday, my dad turned himself into prison.
That was
a wild week.
That is wild. I mean, did you see a lot of your mum's mum? Were you close to your grandmother?
Yeah, I loved her with all my heart. Yeah, so that was terrible.
How do you even, I'm not surprised that you can't remember things. Like that's got to be like some shock or trauma. That is, I can't even begin to even comprehend getting that news on the eve of your father Did you go? Did you go to his sentencing as well? Did you go to the
Yeah,
courthouse?
yeah. I did. So
What did it feel like to sit in the room with the family on the other side?
um, I don't know. It was. I guess I always have like. It's almost unfair, but like I always can't stand the need to demonize one side or another in situations like that. What I mean is like in a criminal case, like if somebody's wrong, like people can so easily forget that there's a whole family involved, and like
Yeah.
and everybody gets lumped in. It's like, well, obviously they must all be a bunch of psychopathic jerks. But I was like, I not only did I was a part of this situation, I was on the bad side of it, and I had this residual guilt that I still have to this day of like, I mean, obviously I didn't do anything involved with it.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with it. But at the same time, I feel like I do. And it affected my family for sure. And that's when I realized that the legal system here is, like when he went to prison, there was nobody who came to us and be like, okay, now that your dad's gone, this is how you're going to handle things or whatever like that. Nope. You're all on your own.
Yeah, especially if Straightway was very patriarchal in the way you described, and then your mum's left with all of these children, obviously.
Yeah,
So
and that's.
When you went to see your father in the hospital, was there a moment where he sobered up and realized what had happened?
I think so. I remember my mom telling him probably way too early, because I remember him because being in this room with all these like people who had been really injured, and but I think it was some sort of small realization.
I mean, and have you spoken to him? Do you speak to him now? Are you still in touch?
Yeah, it's complicated, but yeah, we there's a lot of family drama that's happened since. A lot of family drama has happened since. Leaving the cult, one of them. Yeah. So, but as far as like that situation, yeah, I don't know if we've ever had like a real sit down to just talk about it, from his point of view and things like that.
Do you think that that's something that is kind of really needed for, a true relationships to be able to, or do you think you'll just continue to go along with like a strained relationship?
Woo, that's a deep question. I don't know. I mean, I'm still dealing with it. That's all I could really say. It's just like it'll never not be a thing. It'll never not have affected me. And I'm thankful I'm in therapy now. That has been helpful a lot. And I thought for a long time I didn't think I needed it, because I was like, at first it was like, well, we're part of this cult that knows everything, so I have to toughen up and like we'll get through it because God is with us. And then slowly, like, as my family, each one of us dealt with it in our own ways.
Yeah.
I won't cast judgment on them, but like, at first I was like really disappointed, being like, why are you not handling this better? And now I really regret having that thought, but I realized, like, what? There was no instruction booklet,
No,
we were all figuring it out on our own.
And at different times as well, because one person's seed of doubt might come years, decades before somebody else's does.
Yeah.
It's the same with grieving, isn't it? Some people are kind of like, okay, the funeral is where I'll get closure, and then other people are like 2, 3, 4 years down the line are still, can't talk about that person, can't see photos of that person because it's too difficult for them. So
exactly.
I mean, it must just be such a strange situation. What is your relationship like with your siblings now? Do you speak with them regularly?
Not too much. There's one sibling I don't speak with anymore. And then, each of us is dealing with our things in our own life. I think we still all love each other, but it's complicated.
Yeah, well, families is unconditional love. I always say, like, you love your family, but you don't have to like them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, you're obviously just focusing on your journey and yourself and where you are, and you've got your huge project that you're sinking your teeth into. All your time, effort, energy is going into that. And you seem to be a pretty upbeat, confident, a happy-go-lucky person. So something's obviously working.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I've always wanted to be. I don't know. I guess part of me is like, I still like, don't want to be beaten by this. I want to. I feel like I have, if I have a selfish goal, on a non-negative version of selfish, it's to be like, I've got to see this through. I've got to see whatever the end of this is.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to believe that there's a good version that's possible, even through all this. And that's why I get really like, I almost get mad at people sometimes who, I like, it's one thing to get mad at people who are negative because they believe something you don't believe. I think it's another thing entirely to when people get like, kind of disenchanted by any sense of hope, who I would shade my life with in an instant. Like I see it, like I sympathize, I empathize, but also I'm like, it's like I don't want to believe that, like, for some people all the only answer is to like be bitter and like just
carry around like a big chip on your shoulder for the rest of your life. That must be exhausting. Yeah,
and I know some people in my personal life who just get trapped by that. So I think sometimes negativity gets taken as wisdom, and I don't think it is necessarily. I think real wisdom is being like, here's the bad thing from the situation, here's the good thing from this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone can approach it that way, but like somebody probably can, and for you, maybe, I don't know. Ideally not a cult leader, because I think that's why people get entrapped with cults a lot, because they present a total picture that is based on like this is all you have to do to be right. And I think that's why like certain political leaders get popular, because like people get attracted.
Cult leaders. Cult leaders.
I know. Because people get attracted to someone who never admits they're wrong,
But also promises all the answers as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this weird thing, or some people like me get repulsed by that, and maybe that's part of my experience, but also like people who grew up in the same place don't seem to get similarly repulsed. And I think, to each their own, but for me, I'm like, if anything, my problem was I was so afraid of being egotistical, that I like really cut myself off from a lot of situations because I didn't want to seem selfish. But naturally, I had to pick being a filmmaker who wants to make good things and wants my name on the title, So I'm like, I constantly battle with like, I want this to be good, and I believe what I'm saying is the good version, but also I'm like, but what if I'm wrong?
Leader?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I don't know. Yeah, I think my family, like you brought it up a little bit, like the patriarchal side of things. I think what really instigated my family leaving was just the lack of support we really had. Like, it was all about my dad.
Yeah. So the accident happened in 2005. He goes to jail in 2006.
7.
And 7, sorry. And then there's a gradual sort of distancing between your family and Straightway until you leave in 2010.
That's correct. Yeah. So like even in 2008 when I went to college, it was still like I still had the mindset of like, this is my place,
Right.
But it just became apparent that there was some, like, the way they treated. I feel like I've done a bad job of describing the guilting that happened in these places. Like, there was like counseling sessions that would happen, quote unquote counseling sessions, and there'd be like the main leaders basically get somebody into like a room and just yell at them for being a sinner, so there was a whole lot of guilting involved. And I think after my dad left, there was some support, but there was much more guilting. Like, I think my sister's probably got the worst of it, maybe my older brother too, but he was kind of already on his own thing at that point. But I don't want to speak out of turn for him, but I think it was definitely bigger for my sisters, who were kind of judged on a bigger standard. And like, I even remember David taking me aside one time and being like, I feel like your sisters are just like using this situation as like using it to their advantage, or like taking advantage of it, and I was like, yeah, I think so. And I feel terrible for agreeing with him, but like,
because they're sad that their father isn't there, or because of what happened? But
also they were like doing stuff that teenagers do, so so I think like, I don't mean this in a judgmental way at all, but I was the only one, and that maybe my younger brother a little bit, but he was super young. And he, but I think for me, I was the only one who like took it as like, not quite an adventure, but something in that realm where it's like, almost like a quest that God is giving me. God is giving me this burden to deal with. And so I took it as very much like that. I think for my sisters, I mean, not in a judgmental way, they wanted to be normal teenagers, So with all the trappings, all the adventures, all the things like that. And so I think I was disappointed at first, but only then. In retrospect, I'm like, I can't judge them. In fact, I feel bad for how judgmental I was. I wish my therapist tells me all this time, stop saying you wish.
Yeah.
I wish. But it's like, I don't wish to change the past, but I want to learn from it. And what I've learned is that grace is not something. Grace with deserving, grace with earning, like, will always counteract. And so giving somebody grace is going to entail probably viewing something that they did that could be judged as very bad or very wrong, without using that, but also, so, and I doubt that they did anything like, at that time, at least, I doubt they did anything remotely bad, compared to like all the other hypocrites in high school who are just doing the same shit, so like, they're probably listening to their friends, whereas I was listening to the word of God. I don't know.
Yeah, but the thing is with that, I mean, if it's something you genuinely believe, you could be not worried, worried about your sisters spiritually, if they're doing things that you think, are sinful. So you have that genuine worry there for their souls, or and but then on the flip side of that, they could have also been judgmental of you because you didn't want to act like a typical teenager, like they may have been doing, like a public school typical teenager would act.
Yeah, it's funny because like my sister Summer, who's my she's like probably one of my closest confidant, and I feel like we've gained a connection based on our differences, along with our similarities. But like, I think we've gone to a place where like we feel safe to be able to like present ourselves as like what we were experiencing then. And there's still part of me like sometimes like I'll be up front because I try to remove the judgment, just be like, wow, I would, my old me especially would view that as something I wouldn't want to do or something like that. But I think for the most part, like there was a period where like I had these really big angry outbursts, and I would like push my siblings or whatever, and like it wasn't all the time, but it was definitely once was more than enough. And I didn't want to be this person, and I was just like I couldn't control myself. But what I realized is that I didn't have to give in to the anger, because I thought the manly, like my dad was very like a lot of the dads at the place, was very like boisterous, and anger was seen as like manly. So that's the way I always viewed it, but I can't control my anger that way. If I give in to anger, it's going to come out in like uncontrollable ways, like
rage. Yeah,
exactly. And so I realized like I don't want to be this person, and so I got to a point where like I'm not even going to like get emotional at all, and it worked for the most part. But at the same time, I think I didn't engage at all. Instead of having, what I've learned recently is that the real problem was I never had a healthy place or felt safe to express myself in a healthy way. So I thought not expressing was the healthy option.
Right. Yeah. So it's either over emotional or totally disassociated from anything that's going on.
Yeah.
Which I suppose must be difficult when you're trying to maintain relationships with your siblings, and I imagine this must have been so difficult for your mum as well, to have all of the children and as you said, not much support. So what happened in 2010? Did she eventually make that decision for you guys to move off site?
Mm-hmm, yeah, it was very much her initiation, and because I was in college still, so and I was increasingly feeling like Austin was my place by this point.
Were you staying on a campus, or were you traveling to and from?
I was staying on campus, and then I lived close by.
Okay.
So I ended up having the whole time I was in college, I lived in Austin pretty much, except for a couple winter breaks. But honestly, it's like I had to realize that that I had to go in my own place. So I felt so guilty about that at first, where it's like I feel so bad that like I'm not strong enough to heal this pain. I felt so bad about that. Like it made me feel weak. It made me feel like a coward. But what I realized is that the real issue is that I needed to trust myself and stick with myself, and and there was nothing I could have fixed.
And have you spoken to your mom about all of this? Does she know how you thought and felt at that time?
Just to some extent. I've tried to have a little bit more, but honestly, I felt like writing like a whole letter to everyone, just being like, "Hey, here are my feelings." And you should put them in a memoir,
and you should release that memoir so everybody can read the whole thing, because it just sounds like. I mean, has that crossed your mind to just get it all out on paper?
Yeah, I have thought of it, but at the same time, like, I don't know, my artistic gravity is not a very literal one. For me, it's more of like the spirit behind things. So I feel like I would want to present it in a way that allows for kind of like a meditation on all that stuff, and how like we're part of like how it fits into the bigger scheme of life and all. So I mean, I feel like I have to someday, some way, find a way to do it, and I think maybe all my stories will eventually be about it, because like one plot line of the movie is that there's a car accident, so it's like obviously that's in my mind, and I started writing. And another thing that keeps happening in my movies is doppelgangers for some reason. And I'm always like, what exactly about doppelgangers sticks out to me? I've always like. I try to like be all Freud on myself, being like, why do I keep gravitating towards these things, And I think part of it is probably just like feeling like you yourself as an imposter, or there was a better version of yourself, you yourself being myself. Yeah. So I've just had to learn that, like, wow, this really is my life. I am me, and I'm so appreciative of whatever, delusional dream made me want to be an artist, because I feel like I can only imagine what it would have been like without it.
But I think it's fascinating that you've probably got all of these things that you associate with your childhood and your upbringing that you have either moved away from or maybe get triggered by, and yet the Steven Spielberg game that you played, and then the love and interest and desire to be involved in filmmaking stayed with you to the point that that's what you're doing now, which is difficult to separate, isn't it? It's difficult to be like, well, I don't want to think and feel about all of those things, yet every single time I do something film related, it's always going to go back to me as a child living in that place.
And it's funny because, like, this is tangentially related, I think, but a big part of the program was as we called it, the program, there was these testimonies, and pretty much every like person getting sober was framed as like this insane miracle. Like the only way possible that this could have happened was Jesus. And so we'd have these little testimonies of people, and some people had crazy stories. Like my mom probably has some crazy stories she could tell. My dad too. Like I'm going to narc on my mom a little bit, but Christmas 2013, we went to see The Wolf of Wall Street. Because obviously I'm a movie guy, and I was like,
goodness.
And I was just like, I was so emotionally drained. I was like, I want a movie that's just going to bash my face in right now. And that movie hit the spot, but I saw it with my mother, which was hilarious. But there's a whole part, they talk about Quaaludes and stuff, and she just went, we took those.
Did you kind of like, had to double take a bit?
I think I need to just have a night with my mom where I'm just like, let's just have fun with these stories. Come on. Let's get the guilt out of here. But also that's another thing too. It's like, this is another tangent, but like the fact that like neither of my parents have gone back. I mean, you could argue that the alcohol was, but like neither of them have, like, at least how they describe their stories. Maybe they were embellishing a little bit, but I don't think too much. Like they were drug addicts or had real big problems like that. And so that does speak to something that, like, maybe at the very least getting sober was enough for them to see themselves maybe for the first time as something more, and like having a belief that you are more is good. So these testimonies were framed this way, is like, so me growing up, like, for one, I didn't think of it as a cult, so I didn't think of like my life as interesting, whatever. I hear all these stories and be like, oh shucks, it's such a shame that I'm not going to have a testimony. I'm not going to have an interesting story to tell people about my life.
That's ridiculous. Yeah.
And I feel like, hopefully that wasn't a call to like the most evil karma imaginable, being like, oh, you just wait, you son of a bitch.
It's funny though, because you talked about going up to your first crush and saying, oh, Christian, but now you could go up to people in a bar and be like, I was in a cult.
Oh yeah, and I've actually done that quite a bit. Like, I think there was like a honeymoon phase in a way where I just, like, after we left, and like, because even before we left, like, my brother was sort of kicked out, my older brother, and there was already like a band of people who kind of left, and like were talking about it, and we were still kind of like in their life a little bit, which it's hard for me to explain that context, but there was just like this weird like, and they always framed it as a cult, and I was still there. So I was just like, no, we're not a cult. What are you doing? So that was a weird, situations like that. But there was like this moment where I was just like, we left, and I was just like, I got really interested in cults because I was just like,
yeah, of course,
not deep enough to start a Patreon and a podcast for it, but enough to be like, I'm reading about it, like the book Under the Banner of Heaven, which is a book, like, even though we weren't a Mormon cult, like, that book I've revisited a couple times because it kind of speaks to like a whole arcing journey of that kind of stuff. Like it talks about Mormonism in itself, and then it talks about fundamentalist Mormonism and like people who get sucked into like the stuff like that, and how it just kind of compounds. And so, yeah, and I just recognized for the first time, I was like calling it a cult and then seeing all the signs.
And then reading something about a Mormon cult and being like, hang on a minute, those things happened where we were as well. Maybe it really was a cult.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I finally was just like, yep, we were a cult, I almost kind of like had fun with it a little bit, just being like, yep, I grew up in a cult, because I've always been like upfront about it. And I think people don't even know how to handle it. Like, I don't even know how to handle it because because I feel like a well-adjusted human being, more or less. I have my quirks, I have my weird oddities, but I feel like, you tell me, but I feel like I'm a very knowledgeable human being who doesn't feel like I get swindled over by things anymore. And yet I say I grew up in a cult. Like, who knows what people are thinking? They probably think like, this guy's probably, I mean, he says he left or whatever, but he might still be a freak, something like that.
Yeah, don't let him come over and try and recruit me.
Yeah, and one time I went to a party for the friend. It was a cult-themed party, and people were like talking about like their expertise at cults. And then I would say, yeah, I actually grew up in one, and people would be like, huh. It's like I am the expert here, okay?
Yeah,
I know from experience. So, but people would be like, "Oh, okay."
Or people would be like, "Oh, great costume."
Yeah, exactly. Whatever. Just like, shut up.
I mean, I think when people say cults, they immediately think of like, Jonestown and
exactly
and Heaven's Gate and the cult panic and all those things. But just to go back on a few points before, your father being seen as second in command and then sort of like sweeping the whole thing under the carpet, do you think that's because they didn't want the entire incident to undermine the message of the compound or what David was trying to teach? Because if he's so closely affiliated with the person, the big leader, the big man, the one in charge. Also, did David was he like self-proclaimed prophet at all, or was he preaching the word of God?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Oh yes. I even heard like weird rumors of like him like getting like some sort of like prophecy, quote unquote, from Waco. So it's like that's awful close to a certain other cult, if you know what I mean. But yeah, there was definitely like a sign of like some sort of holiness or whatever, which is really so silly in retrospect because he's like this like just this weird fat dude who just said, and I mean, oh man, there's so many things I could tell you about the sermons we'd have every Sunday. Like our church services were long, man. We'd start at like 10 and we'd end at like 1 or 2. And the sermons would be so long and this like all this like weird stuff about, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was like taking biblical text and like turning it into like this weird psychobabble, like based on like all kinds of stuff. And then my dad actually preached the most sermons. And so that was a thing, like constantly, like always, like a point of pride, like, oh, Dad's the sermon guy, So I think there's still some on, like on iTunes. I think. I mean,
really,
you could probably find some. I tried. I wanted to listen to one that he did before he went to prison, but I think that one was randomly not there. But I think there are still some of my dad's preaching. Yeah. But speaking of iTunes, before I forget. We haven't even talked about the group that goes into schools. So they, I can't believe it. Like we're like 2 hours in, and I haven't mentioned this yet.
No, I
Like
really want to hear it as well.
not only did we, okay, so I'll just phrase it from the beginning. So basically, they had like a youth outreach that would go into schools, and it was like say no to drugs, and they would sing like hip hop songs and stuff. And there's this famous skit that I thought that we invented, but we didn't. But the skit that you can look on YouTube, people have done versions of it. It's basically. And some people I know are going to like jump out of their seats when I mention this because I think it's like a very Texan thing. Like everyone who went to high school in Texas saw this. They take the song Total Eclipse of the Heart, you know, the famous karaoke song.
Yeah.
And they would do a skit with it. And so like the song would start and all that. And then it's like turn around. And then somebody on stage would turn around and they'd have a shirt that says drugs or something like that. And then turn around.
Oh,
and then,
gosh.
And then basically this whole skit of like teenagers getting tempted by drugs. One person gets tempted by drugs and dies.
Yeah.
And then the second person gets tempted by drugs and then it's taken out and is saved, you know. And so my whole youth, I thought that was a Christian song, you know. Like it's like, but they would just perform it at church and at Thanksgiving and things like that. Like it was
and
just like
travel around all the schools.
Yeah,
just
they do that, and then they like literally they built a recording studio at the compound, and they made music. And the songs right now you can listen on Spotify. Look for Straightway presents New Race, and you will hear some. Now. What and it's gonna be weird for me to say this, but I honestly think the music holds up. It's like weirdly good, you know. But it's
Straightway, what was it?
Straightway presents New Race. I think if you just look up New Race.
It's here.
Yep.
Oh, wow. There's a lot. There's Freedom, a tribute to 9/11.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
It's just the weather. Welcome to H-Town.
Yeah. So Welcome to H-Town is a spoof of the song Welcome to Atlanta. H-Town is not Houston, it's Hungerford, which I've never said the name of the city, but that's the name of the city where the cult is.
They have an album called Sunshine. It came out in 2002. So you were still there at that time.
And my brother is actually on the Welcome to H-Town track.
Bumping.
Yep. That was
living it loud.
Mm-mm.
I might actually even put like a little 30-second segment of one of them at the end of one of this episode.
Oh man, great. You know, I guess part of me is like worried of like, what if I just make them famous all of a sudden, you know, like, but it's funny because I like this, we would go and I could just walk into the recording studio and they just randomly be making music or something and be like, oh, hey, I got this new track. So it's like, it's just this, it was just there. I think it was definitely a vanity thing in a way because like his son was like the pastor's son was one of the main rappers and like both his daughters were on it and all kinds of stuff. So it was like huge vanity stuff, but yeah, so they would sell these albums at the going school to school.
And you said your brother was involved in one of them. Which track?
The Welcome to H-Town.
Okay. If I do use a sample, that's the one I'll pop some in.
The funny thing is, like me telling him about this song might finally get copyright infringement finally because they totally ripped off that song.
And after you left in 2010, and you mentioned like kind of being in a, you know, kind of euphoric bubble and talking about being in a cult. Did you feel like there was any adjustment that you had to do? You know, you talked also about like, oh, I need to lock my door now. Like, was there any other major adjustment to life outside of the compound?
Sort of. I mean, we didn't feel that disconnected to the town, Wharton. Like, so it wasn't like the craziest leap, but the fact that before we officially left, we moved into town because my grandma had bought a house just before she died in town. And for whatever reason, I'd have to ask my mother if she left for financial reasons or because she really wanted to get out of there. Mm-hmm. For one reason or another, we left the house, which was the pastor's old trailer that was kind of converted into more of a house-like thing. Like when he moved into his house, he gave us his old place, which was a big space. But then we moved out of the compound completely into town, into the house that my grandma had built. And so that was the first bit of like, and then this is all like after my dad went to prison. So like 2008, like in the middle of my senior year of high school, we moved, so that was another like just jolt of like, wow, we're not even there
just
anymore.
Another complete upheaval. Yeah.
And I have my memory of my senior year is so fuzzy. It's like I wish I could remember it better, because I just almost just want to like say like, hey, Stefan, you probably did a good job, all things considered.
Yeah, absolutely.
I almost want to learn from you. How the hell did you handle it? But I think I don't know. There was always just this sense of desperation, and also this sense of like we just need to survive until Dad gets out. Like when I said like the sentence was like a 6-month minimum, I was like, oh, of course my dad will get that. And then I heard like parole would come up in 2 years. Like, well, of course my dad will get that. And then he didn't get that. And then he didn't get the next one and the next one. So it just kept going, and it compounded on itself. It's kind of like people getting cycles of debt. It was like it was like a cycle of there was a dependence on him getting out that I don't blame, but at the same time I'm like, I wish there was some way. I wish.
I mean, when he was due to when it was actually coming up that he would be released as well, that would make me feel like sick with anticipation, just like counting down the time. And then did he just he's just going to move back into the house and everything's just going to go back to normal?
For one, we found out he was getting out 2 days before he got out, so there was no countdown. Yeah, so he like basically he got out 6.5 years after he started. So
your mum just gets a phone call like I'm gonna be home in 2 days.
Yeah, I'm the going through that thing with my dad, like instantly I was like, yep, criminal justice reform needs it. This is terrible. And I had like not the worst version of it to so many other people, which I try not to guilt myself with. Like, it's almost like a reverse guilt where like, he didn't really have it that bad. I'm like, I still had it bad. I mean, come on. I would go to visit him. I remember one time I went to visit him, like he'd just be moved around prisons all over Texas. Because Texas loves their prisons, let me tell you. Oh, they love their prisons.
And the death sentence.
Yeah. Yes, that is true. Which there's a whole nother story about a famous serial killer that my mom befriended in prison with a prison ministry. What?
Stop springing these things on me out of nowhere. What on earth is?
Yeah, look up Carla. Well, she's not a serial killer. She's a multi-murder, but she was known as the pickaxe murderer. Her name is Carla Faye Tucker, and my mom, there was they would go to prisons. Like my mom, my dad, and a few other people. So it was kind of similar to the school thing, except it was more the adults. And they would go to prisons, and like prison ministry is a pretty common thing. And so they would do that, and they would do, I'm no joke, they would do puppet shows in prison. So they would like do worship
to entertain the prisoners or to convert them to Christianity.
I think more conversion, I guess, but like they would do stuff like that. But apparently, like this girl, Carla Faye Tucker, she was on death row, and my mom basically is the reason she became like this world famous converted killer. And like, there was a big deal for a little bit where she was going to be executed in Texas, but she was also like became saved and all this stuff. So it's that's a whole, there's so many facts from that story that I believed from our end, because it was always kind of like a tooting our own horn kind of thing. Like, yeah. And it was weird because we suddenly became anti-death penalty, which is like very counter to a lot of a lot of right-wing people. Yeah. It's just like because of that, so
it says here on Wikipedia, Carla Faye Tucker was an American woman sentenced to death for killing 2 people with a pickaxe during a burglary. She was the first woman to be executed in the United States since Velma Barfield in 1984, and the first in Texas since Chipita Rodriguez in 1863.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think there was an episode of like some A&E show where my mom was interviewed about it. You know,
So really, if I really wanted to, I could go on the internet and I could find your father delivering services, your mother in a documentary about a female serial killer,
yeah,
and your brother featured on tracks of a Christian Bible group who made songs in their own music
yeah.
studio.
And you can find some of my really crappy short films that I made.
I'll find your short films and then I'll go to a festival and watch your film.
Nice.
This is just such a wild ride. Honestly,
well,
this story.
when you put it that way, So yeah, one last thing related to like the Straightway going to schools. For a little bit, they started doing a summer camp, and so they would like go to schools and they'd be like, "Hey, if you liked us, come to our summer camp." And so they had a summer camp on the compound with like these people they just got from schools, I guess, but also like all the kids who lived there.
What you wait. So kids who didn't live at Straightway, kids that just went to schools and their parents would send them to like Bible camp.
Pretty much, yeah.
And they would then become part of the church group?
No, I think they were a little less leechy in that case. I think they would hope so. I think a couple people they did join in those circumstances, like join the going to schools thing. Like,
right, yeah.
A couple people on the albums, actually, probably.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird, random things like that. So the camp, that camp stuff was really fascinating because it was weird because it was a very breaking out of shell moment for me because I was like didn't want to be a part of it, and then I remember having a really good time, and so there you go.
So the program itself, I mean, you've spoken about how your parents were able to overcome their substance abuse, and so that speaks to the efficacy of the program in itself, really, that it did work for some people. I think this was the same with Synanon. When Synanon first started out, the very first stages of it, where people would stop using drugs if they stayed in the program. It's that turning point of when they say, okay, but now you can't leave, or now you shouldn't leave, and let's all live together. I think that's the turning point. So I think it's important to point out to, not even to the listeners, but just to just put it out there in the universe that there must be programs like this that genuinely are positive and do work. It's when you get that person that craves a position of power and has such a severe case of narcissism that it becomes dangerous and unhealthy for people. And you end up with stories of trauma where people like yourself will have these stories to tell. So I just wanted to just kind of like throw that out there. But my last question to you before I hand it over to you, in case there's anything you think we've missed, is you've mentioned a little bit about attending therapy. Is that something that you would advise other people who might find themselves in similar situations to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I went through this big old phase of denying that I needed therapy because I kind of took that more of like the unfairness of like having to pay for medical stuff and all that, and so I always viewed it as like a cheat code. Like this is stuff I could figure out. I could just pay to get it figured out faster. That's the way I thought of it. And honestly, like I had it's not a cult story, it's more personal story, but like after college, I had the worst depression of my life, and I was just, and I came close to giving up on life entirely. And what really started the process of getting better was just kind of reaching the bottom and being like, it's like, well, I have two options. I can, well, technically three. There's the dangerous, like just literally give up on life option.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also like a quit, like go to a small town and live a small town life or something, or like figure out where I am now instead of like hoping, because I was hoping that like, I was literally dreaming of like filmmaking as like a thing that would come and save me. Like it was a miraculous thing,
right?
A very spiritual thing. And I don't mean that in the sense of like I was doing nothing. Like I was interning, I was trying to make things work, but I had no money. And I was at this retail job that was driving me insane, and I felt no way out. But then I started actually working on my finances from my end. Because I was so resistant to doing that, because I thought like, oh, I don't want money to be the thing that saves me, like I almost wanted it to be a miracle rather than money. So it's so hard to describe, but the short answer is yes. And I think, honestly, I wish there was a more defined 12-step program for stuff like this, and there probably is, and I probably just haven't searched enough. But like, I think the rare times I've talked to people who, I just know who've gone through a similar experience, whether they frame it as a cult, maybe it's just very dogmatic religion,
Mm-hmm.
Which is still pretty close. I think. I don't know. Maybe you just need to find the right therapist, honestly, because I tried a couple of times, and the first couple of times were based around Christian therapists,
Right.
and I think I had a lot of problems with the religion and leadership at this point, to where I was just like, this feels wrong. This feels like it could be better, and like even non-culty versions of religion still have like, there's these stereotypes that happen. That are like really disconcerting, like the way the people who become leadership are all look the same, and like that means something, that means we're like, that there's a frame of what a perfect person is, and if you don't fit in that frame, then if you don't fit in that visage that then that happens. But so I still wanted it to work. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I wanted to be a good Christian. I wanted to I wanted to believe that it all could work together. It all could coincide and be in this beautiful thing. And there's still part of me that kind of has that ideal. I've just removed a lot of the dogma out of it, I think. Because like I get really depressed when people are like, I don't want kids, like not because I think it's a wrong choice. I mean, I think it's a very fair choice for a lot of people, especially in this economy. I mean, come on, but at the same time, I feel like who is making that choice? Like, are you really making that choice? Or is it like this like resignation that like, that kind of life is only for people who are like either delusional or well off or something like that.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, I'm like, it's like, I want to believe that like that choice is based on like, this is the person I want to be, not the person I'm forced to be,
Yeah.
And I feel like, so, and I mean that with no judgment whatsoever to anybody who makes that choice. But, so I finally found a therapist, and I decided I wanted a female therapist because it just felt like it was right. And I found this woman named Susan, who's been delightful. We do it over the phone, and she's just like this strange, weird person that I've gelled with, So I think, I think sometimes maybe that's the thing. Like, don't look for someone who's like this perfect, like philosopher or whatever. Sometimes you need someone who's like down home and like doesn't get all stuck up in those kind of things.
And I think it's Not surprising that you would have preferred a female therapist after being under David's leadership for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything you think we've missed or anything you wanted to
Oh my
add?
God. I mean, there's still so. I mean, I'm totally down to do another session if you want someday. I'm sure there's a million other stories, but I don't think I've missed anything necessarily. Only that whew,
It's difficult, isn't it? It's a big thing
yeah.
to kind of
Yeah.
summarize.
I guess I'll end on like a positive note. It's like one thing that was cool about being out in the middle of nowhere was the darkness in a weird way, because it was just like when the sun goes down and like there's lights maybe very far in the distance, and then the only light is the place you're at. So that kind of adds to the mood of like, we are the light in the darkness, you know. But the first time I drove by after we left, several years after. I guess I'll just really quickly tell the story of the actual leaving, because there was like an official like leaving.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
we'd already moved into town, but there's stuff in the house that we lived in. Like they didn't make us get it out, which I don't know if that was laziness or whatever. But basically, like as we were leaving, and like not even just leaving. Like they moved to a completely different city, closer to Houston, and that was my mom and the siblings who were living with her. What happened was so I had to go with her, and then two random guys who didn't even speak English, who were hired to help. And what they had done is they had moved all of our stuff out of that house into one of the quad areas. And it was just all over the floor. And
All of your things.
yeah. And then somebody was in a truck just watching us from a distance the whole time.
What?
Yeah, I was the most trippy moment of my life. I was just like, because people left, and that was always like this big deal of like, they've been consumed by sin. And I never thought ever I would be on that side of things. But here I was. And it was like a poorly written movie version too, where it's like I'm being banished, you know. It was just like it was just nuts. And so we took hours of us just moving the stuff in a U-Haul truck, and you know, while people watched us at a distance. And then
that's so uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yeah. So, that was the last time I stepped foot there. I drove by, but I've never gotten out of the car. So, and then the drive home was really emotional and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, that was. I'd say that's the second worst day of my life, other than the day my grandma died. And I kind of framed that week as a day, you know. So that was the worst time of my life. And then,
it sounds as if it kind of all just blended into from one heartbreaking event to another.
Yeah.
So, I mean, where do you go from here? You're going to continue therapy.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to continue with your work. I mean, you've applied for your film to be. You're waiting to hear back on whether the film will be shown at the festival. Is that right?
I'll be applying to it at the end of this week. So by the time people hear this, yes.
And when will you know?
Probably December or something like that. You know, I'm not putting a lot of eggs in this one because it's one of the bigger ones, but I do know someone who works there, so I'm going to be like, "Hey, how you doing?"
Yeah. Fantastic. So you just immerse yourself in your work. You've got a good relationship with one of your sisters, who you said before is like your closest confidant. So she sounds like she's a really good friend of yours as well. So you're just on your journey, and I feel really privileged to be able to sit down and speak with people who have such interesting stories to tell, but even more so when I can speak with people who have been through such trauma and such just situations that most of us couldn't even begin to imagine being put in those positions, but just have like such a warm personality, and just see like, you know, the good side of things, and the good things that happen alongside the bad. And I think that's really commendable. I think it's brave that people will come and tell me their stories, that they'll sit down and talk, and you know that other people will be listening to them. So I'm just really thankful that you've come to tell me your story. I didn't get the opportunity to get too many notes from you either before we spoke, so I had absolutely no idea that you would tell me half the things you did this evening. So I feel like, you know, it's quite late at night here now, and I feel like it's going to take me a few hours to wind down.
Oh, well, I apologize.
Don't apologize. It's been absolutely fantastic. I'm going to go and research a little bit more about Straightway, or Restoration City, which is still open. I was looking at pictures before. It is exactly as you said, just huge piece of land in the middle of nowhere, with buildings on it, and still active, which is strange. I mean, families going and living in this place. I can't imagine it. It feels very 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been a big thing for me all these years later. It's been a decade since we left now, and I guess it's like, do I have a responsibility here to like say something? Because it's like, part of me is like, did they do something wrong, or was it just a weird twisted logic place like I'm sure are all over the world? So I think for me, it's like, you know, I can only say it the way I know it, and you know, I think it's up for other people to decide, you know.
Is it still David who's there? Is he still?
From my understanding, I think one of his daughters is kind of like running it day to day kind of thing, which she's kind of been doing for a little bit. But he's still there from my understanding.
And they've just changed the name of it, like a rebrand kind of thing.
Yeah, which is something they've done several times. So
it's maybe it's whenever something really bad happens, they're like, well, if we just change the name of it, people won't know.
I know.
I guess we'll never know. And I guess there's things that you'll never know because you were so young when all of it happened.
Yeah, and to be able to know it would be to get it out of people who might be, because I've known a couple people who like have told me like real bad things that happened to them, which I don't know if is necessarily a cult thing as much as like bad things happen, but the way that it was reacted to was terrible. Like it was basically like, take this like cursed religious thing. Like I know a guy who's had like a sexual thing happen that was really bad, and basically he was kind of disciplined because of it, even though he was the victim. So, you know, it was taken like very much like you're unholy because of this kind of thing versus actually.
Oh, that's absolutely. That's so sad. That's awful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like I've just been I've done a huge segment on the Jehovah's Witnesses. I've spoken to so many ex-members of the religion, and there's a lot of abuse allegations against church members at the moment, and court trials and all sorts happening over here in the UK, because the Jehovah's Witnesses have this thing where they have like a 2-witness rule. So people are coming forward saying that they've been sexually abused, and then people are like, well, why was it covered up? And then the elders of the congregations are saying, well, we don't really believe that it happened unless there was a second witness. Well, I mean, 9 times out of 10 when sexual abuse happens, there isn't going to be somebody there to witness it. I don't know, that makes no sense to me.
I've read up on them Jehovah's Witnesses, let me tell you.
That makes no sense to me. What you just said about the person who was abused being told that they are unholy, that's just a whole, that's layering of abuse, isn't it? Exactly. It's going from one abusive situation straight into another. That's so horrific, and it's worrying that these things could still be happening, probably are still happening. You know, the rehabilitation therapy centers all over America and the world that are run by people that aren't qualified, don't have the credentials, have no formal training or education in the field that they are supposed to be employed in, children that are sent to these places by their parents and the court systems that have no choice but to stay there, again in the middle of nowhere with no way of getting home. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just baffles my mind, but it interests me at the same time, and that's why we're here talking tonight. So I mean, I'm probably gonna end the recording there, but just thank you so much. I have learned a lot more than I thought I was going to this evening. You've given me a lot more than I bargained for, I think, and I'm just so appreciative and privileged to be able to sit down and have this conversation with you tonight, Stefan.
Well, I appreciate it. I've been wanting to get this out in a long form for a while, so this has been very good for me as well, I think.
I hope so. Maybe if I ever get a chance to sit down and speak with the second person who is going to come and chat with us tonight, you can come along and we can have those interactions, and I can, listen to you two comparing experiences and remembering things, and maybe you'll jog each other's memories as well of things that you've both forgotten.
Sure thing.
So fantastic. Thank you so much, Stefan. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. And you the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a review if you can. It really does help. Get in touch at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod.